Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming to our lore panel. My name is Nick Braccia. I'm a co-founder of Strider, where I run content and partnerships, and are going to engage in a little chat about lore and the future of lore with Axie alongside Paul and Andrew. Very briefly, my background is in helping to grow entertainment franchises. I strategize them. I do activations. I've worked with IP like Game of Thrones, Westworld, Watchmen, Man in the High Castle, created and sold my own horror IP to AMC Shudder. So that's kind of my world. And in Web3, I've just been really thrilled about the possibility of working with these communities, working with great IP like Axie, and figuring out how to build worlds together, because there's something really special going on here. I'll let Andrew talk a little bit more about Strider and what we're doing as he introduces himself.
Hi, everybody. Andrew Green. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Strider. I've been in games for about 22 years. I started when I was 20 years old, so I'm not as old as I seem I might be. I started at Take-Two Interactive, worked at Atari Electronic Arts. I actually launched the Dead Space brand and franchise. That's where I actually met Nick. We worked on Dead Space together. I also worked and built a mobile gaming studio called TinyCo, where we made games for large franchises like Marvel Avengers. And biggest thing I worked on there was I partnered with Warner Brothers and J.K. Rowling on building out Harry Potter Hogwarts Mystery, which was a big Harry Potter RPG that took place in the 10 years between when Harry got zapped by Voldemort and then when the movies start. So our team had to build out the lore for the Harry Potter universe with J.K. Rowling's team, which is an enormous responsibility and enormous undertaking. And it was one of the biggest things that I learned in terms of like lore development. You know, obviously did a lot of EA in games with Nick, but that was kind of a step up there. After that, I went into games investment and built kind of the gaming network at Andreessen Horowitz, and eventually found our way to building Strider, because throughout our careers, whether as a creator like Nick is, or as a game developer, we've always been kind of looking at how communities have wanted to be closer to the development process, to make it more their own, and for creators themselves to be more empowered as part of the content development process. And we were like, Web3 really has the ability is the technology that can power a shift into community-developed games and IP. And we want to be at the center of that. And so that's what Strider is building, a platform that really empowers community to build IP and entertainment products together. Really excited to be here, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you to Axie and Sky Mavis and the community for having us today.
And Paul, I'm sure most of the people in the audience know you. But if you could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what brought you to the Axie universe.
Yeah, well, let me just maybe say a little bit more about the Strider team. I've been incredibly excited to work alongside them as we establish a partnership between Sky Mavis and Strider. And what I think is really exciting about this partnership is that not only do they bring an experience around building worlds outside of Web3, but they really understand the power of community. And in my role as community lead, I have the opportunity to get to know all of the amazingly talented people within our community that already have a lot of amazing ideas about the Axie universe, where they want to take it. And I think the opportunity here is to find this hybrid between the great examples of lore that have been built in other universes, but do that in a Web3 native way by empowering a community. And so I'm particularly interested in this topic because it seems like a really important part of community development, having a collaborative opportunity to build lore alongside the community over time.
So we're going to have kind of a freewheeling conversation, but the tenets of it are going to be around the power of community, but also the tenets and experience that Andrew and I have working with massive franchises. And there was a word that Andrew mentioned in his introduction, which was responsibility. And the first question I have for him is, working on Potter, working with Marvel, with Futurama, with the EA franchises that we've touched. I'd love to hear a little bit from you about taking on the responsibility of building lore, telling stories inside of a franchise where community is very passionate, has perspective, has expectations, and the kinds of things that one needs to do when approaching that to ensure success.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, I don't think anybody is going to find themselves in a lore creation role unless they are themselves a fan of lore. I started and have been a junkie of worlds, of media, of games since I can't remember a time in my life where I wasn't enamored by some kind of story, whether it was Star Wars or E.T. or whether it was Dead Space or Resident Evil. I have always just loved seeking what is behind the experience that I'm having. Who are these characters? How did they end up in these predicaments? What are their motivations? What's happening around them and what's happening in the greater world? I want to live there, right? I don't know why I want to live there, I just do. And I think that that is the basis for getting into these types of roles that we're in game development, in film, TV, and in writing, in any of this, is because there's something inherently incredible about how the human mind can craft. It's a whatever you want to call it, a computer or an interface of, but the human mind is the most incredible interface for accessing other worlds. And we get to create that, but what's interesting is when you harness that, when you take it from the ephemeral to the real, when you try to hone it and harness it and build it and deliver it to people as products or as things, you have to really think about what is the essence of this? What makes this valuable? And when you're working with someone else's IP, that's where that responsibility comes from, because you are wow, first of all, this exists already. A great team of creators and this giant community already has a lot invested in it. Every individual is like a beacon connecting to that world. They each have their own experience with it. They each get something out of it. They each connect to a certain character a certain way. And that builds a culture. And there's a culture around every brand, every lore that is developed, every IP that is developed, and a community it's a push and a pull between the world itself and what's created and provided and the community that's experiencing it, because it is very much a living thing. And when you come in as a developer of a product or as a lore developer like we did on Harry Potter, the responsibility is immense, because you have a responsibility to be honest and true to everyone that is touched and is touching that brand, whether they are a community member or they are the creator themselves. Because in that is the only way that you will succeed with whatever endeavor you are creating. You cannot succeed in creating new lore, in creating, in trying to create guidelines around lore or build new products unless you have a very specific understanding of what the need and the emotion that you are fulfilling is. And thusly, that is responsibility to the people that are going to be consuming it or a part of playing it and whatnot. So it's an enormous responsibility, and that responsibility begets success.
So that's awesome. And I'd love to hear, anecdotally, working on the IPs that you have, is there a specific example where you felt that responsibility, and tangibly and tactically were coming up with or generating an idea within lore that you knew was pivotal and that people were going to have strong opinions about, and how you kind of navigated that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll never forget, like, you know, and I was younger when we were working on Dead Space. You know, the team, so Electronic Arts at the time had, their franchises were like Madden, Need for Speed, Battlefield. There wasn't a character to be found at Electronic Arts, right? And if there was a character to be found, it was James Bond, right? Like, because they did like a licensed game or whatever. Like, no one was like thinking, you didn't think about lore at EA. You thought about gameplay, and you thought about features, and you thought about like franchise metrics, right? And all of a sudden, we have this team led by Glenn Schofield, who's currently doing Callisto Protocol, and he's like he built Lord of the Rings at EA. He built, you know, for again, a licensed game for the movie. No lore creation, no character creation, just creating those games are amazing games, by the way. The Lord of the Rings games that EA made somehow were like actually amazing games. But so he built all this equity doing Tiger Woods and all of a sudden EA's like, so Glenn, what do you want to do next? We actually don't have another franchise for you to develop. He's like, I want to make a survival horror game set in space. And EA was like, cool. And like, he got buy-in from them. They gave him a team of 4, and then a team of 10, and then a team of 30, and then a team of 100, right? And all of a sudden, I get bought in because it's finally time to like try to get to greenlight. And greenlighting a game means, okay, we're going to take this budget from, you know, 20 million to 100 million. And nowadays, it's like, we're going to take this budget from 100 million to 500 million. Anyway, so there's a ton of pressure on this team that has been building already for 2 years inside of EA, or like a year and a half, inside of EA, trying to get them to like care about this universe, these characters, Isaac Clarke, the Nishimura, you know, like to actually this universe that they're building. And it gets to greenlight, and they're basically like, okay, let's start working on the marketing. I walk into a room, and all of the developers are there, and they're like, they don't have greenlight yet, and now we have to start building the marketing campaign and selling that to the EA executives. I have never felt more responsibility in my life to this development team, because I was like, they are putting everything of themselves into this game. The art was all over the walls. The vibe of the studio felt like I was in outer space. Like they were living there, right? And if I didn't live there, if I didn't go there, if I didn't go to that place, if I didn't get as excited about these characters, about these things, if I didn't think about the eventual fans that I wanted to create for this world because it was so badass, I was doing everyone a disservice. And I have never felt so much pressure. I was having like, I think I broke out in hives one day. Anyway, Nick and I ended up working on that project together, and there was some really crazy moments in that campaign. But it ended up being one of the most rewarding experiences of my life because I really did have responsibility to that team and dedicated myself to it. And that's where all of my best ideas and creativity came from, was that area of responsibility.
Thanks. Paul, so you've come to the Axie universe, and most people's first touch point, right, was with the game, with Axie as a game rather than a story world. I'd love to hear from you what kinds of storytelling and story world possibilities you think have been opened up through the game.
Well, I do think that when you go out into the world and you ask most people what do they think about Axie Infinity, you think about Origin or the Battles game, the card game. And hopefully you all have started to realize amongst each other and through the work that we've been publishing recently in our dev updates and things like that, that we really see Origin as a window into a larger universe. You know, there are these Axies, and we're starting to see bad guys. We're starting to see not only fights between Axies, but fights between Axies and larger forces. Where did those larger forces come from? How did the Axie universe get formed in the first place? Who are these characters? How did they get to know each other? We're starting to learn that there's this larger universe of course, we obviously have the land of Lunacia. We have all of these plots. They've been laid out in a certain formation. Why are they in that formation? And I think these are the kinds of questions that people are starting to ask. And what's really interesting is that many members of the community, because they're so excited about the potential, are starting to theory craft in their own mind. So like in the previous session, we just saw like the Big Yak Axie Club. My guess is that they fit somewhere within this larger universe. You have these other games that are being developed that start to allude to something that's bigger than just a card battling game. And I think that's where we're headed. You know, the whole concept of Axie Infinity is that it's a gaming universe. And I think what you're going to learn more about in the months to come is that the team is working really hard on trying to build the foundation of that, to describe the underlying story of that. And you know, that's been part of what's been so exciting to work with the Strider team on is building out that world and having a massive vision for potentially hundreds of games. It's not in many ways to constrain players. We want to create a lot of white space for them to be able to come up with their own ideas, to create stories for their Axies, stories for their land, but to give them a foundation on which they can start to build stories, something a little bit more dense than maybe what's been provided up to this point.
Cool. Now, when we talk about, if we put on like our world building hats, there's the technical stuff, there's exposition, there's all the facts, right, and mythology. But there's also like thematic underpinnings to every story world. There's a reason why a Star Trek story is different than a Star Wars story. When you think about the Axie universe and the fact that everyone's going to be essentially building and telling stories from the same set of thematic Legos, like what are those key tenets? What are those themes that you see as being universal building blocks that everyone can use to collaborate and tell stories together with?
Well, I have my own opinion on this. I feel like in many ways the reason why we all travel around the world to be together at events like this, and the reason that we spend so much time together, is that we share values. We have a vision of a different kind of tribe that we all seem to connect with each other on in ways that we can't really fully describe. And I think what's really underneath that is some values. So like, for example, I was talking with Arctic last night, and we talked about generosity being a theme of our community. I think about you know, opportunities that come from selflessness, kindness to each other. You know, these are things that maybe candidly we don't necessarily see out in the real world in the way that maybe we might want them to. And we see a place like Axie Infinity as an opportunity to create something different. And so I think in many ways the universe needs to be a byproduct of the people that are within the community. And so I think a lot of the themes that we're starting to see emerge within this world evolve around those same core ideas: kindness, opportunity from generosity, you know, all of the things that we all stand for. I don't know what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, I think that the core tenets of Axie for me are visual. And I think that the visual world of Axie is extraordinarily rich, and it, again, gets my imagination going into incredible places. And so immediately I start kind of wanting to know more and dive in more and create more. And so for me, I think it's going to be more about bringing out what everyone in the community kind of feels, sees, and like wants from that kind of visual experience that they're having today, because it is such a strong visual experience that it just begets so much story and richness of like getting your mind going around like what is behind all of this. So I'm very excited about that opportunity, especially.
Yeah, I don't know, one little extra comment. I don't know about you guys, but like for me, one of the first movies that I saw was the original Star Wars, and I was like, you know, 6 or 7 when I saw it, so I'm a little bit older. But it was a foundational moment in my life, and I can remember all of the play that I did afterwards. I created all of these, you know, games and stories in my mind that, you know, followed watching that movie. And I think, within the Axie universe, there's a similar opportunity to create that kind of larger playground in which we can create all kinds of adventures.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. The tenets that you guys named, I completely agree with. But I think about my experience with Axie and playing Origin, and what's consistent for me is that I'm overwhelmed with almost a sense of calmness and peace when I'm playing the game. That feels very safe, almost rejuvenating and medicinal. And I feel like it owns that in a very specific way. When I'm playing games in similar genres and stuff, often you get overwhelmed with stress. You're like, am I going to win this battle? Doesn't happen. A combination of the visuals, the music, the mechanics all coming together leave me always feeling terrific and restored. And I think we're really all coming at it from different angles, but they feel very true to me. And as we're going forth to build stories, providing those frameworks and making sure that everyone is working together to tell Axie stories that share this DNA, no matter what kind of angle we're all coming from. I'm going to zoom out a little, Andrew, because I want to talk to you about the fact that you and I are deep, old-school, gray-bearded Web 2 and Web 1
I'm not old.
people. You're 5 years younger than me, but you're pretty old. We're telling stories in this new environment that's emerged over the last 3 to 5 years. And I'd love to hear from your perspective as a leader, as a storyteller, what Web 3 unlocks.
I mean, a lot. A lot. It's a really big topic that I'll try to be succinct about, but I have always wanted to get out of the constraints of the systems of how worlds and stories have been built traditionally, which are very hierarchical. And because the capital that is behind generating some of the biggest IPs are, in a kind of capital hierarchy, like a capitalist hierarchy. Nothing against capitalism specifically, right? It's a fine system. It's just how is it utilized, right? And usually the emotions and incentive structures that are breeded by it are those about risk and opportunity. When risk is involved, people tend to become more and more and more risk averse over time. It just happens. They might get lightning in a bottle, something incredible happens, they get to kind of, ride on the benefit of that initial passion that they had, that initial excitement when there was a little bit of capital, and they put their ideas out there and it exploded. But then as it grows and as more people come into it from a business perspective, more and more you become too many risk intolerant, too many financial decisions, and it doesn't just become purely about the quality of the content or of the connectivity with the fans. As a matter of fact, in some ways I have seen creatives and the community be treated second to the potential profits. And that creates a really bad loop of building and incentive structures, and creators are diminished and fans are diminished within that process. Web3 essentially flips all of that back because it gives everyone in the community and beyond the power to not only bring their own money and capital to bear on things that they care about and invest in them, but that with that investment, they can have a voice in what is being built. Additionally, if you are a community member and or contributor or skilled worker, you don't need to make an investment at all and can just contribute your time, your energy, your passion to that project, and you are providing an immense amount of value that then has a direct reward link. That is, the system for someone to do that today has an insane amount of friction in it. As a community member or contributor, Web3 demolishes all of that friction. And that is an incredibly powerful mechanic. That is the most powerful mechanic. Yeah.
And I don't know that we've seen an opportunity like that a shift like that in our professional career.
No.
Maybe in our lifetime. Going back to what you were saying with responsibility earlier, I'm going to kind of shift to Paul, because the responsibility of working within an IP as a partner or someone internally is working for Sky Mavis, it all starts with listening. It all starts with listening to the community and understanding what's important. So Paul, I'd love to hear from you from a storytelling perspective and being the community lead. What does the Axie universe want?
Well, I think the core thing that comes to mind for me is I think every player, every community member wants to be able to contribute in a way that adds value. I think that's a really interesting part of the DNA of this community. And, you know, again, I just look at this audience of people that have come from all around the world, and I think they really believe in the mission of this universe. And I think this represents probably the largest and most advanced opportunity for people to make a contribution to a world. And so I think, you know, we've established this social contract. I mean, it's been pretty clearly established over the past couple of years where we can collectively own this ecosystem. We can collectively build it out. We can collectively have agency over what it's to look like. I think where the opportunity is now is to give a little bit of guidance and structure. It's not necessarily telling the full story, but it's giving enough space for people to go and build in a way in where all of those pieces come together into a cohesive whole that makes some sense. I think when you do storytelling, you need some structure in it. And I think a lot of the stories that are being told today would benefit from having a little bit more of a foundation of lore. And so I think that community members are expecting to have those foundations available to them. Mm-hmm. And I think they're also expecting to be able to participate. You know, like the Big Yak Axie Club to me is like one of the best examples of this. You know, it's this whole culture, and I'm assuming that they would love to understand how the Big Yak Axie Club fits into this larger world of Lunasia. And I think the community owes it to them to give them a construct in which they can fit mm-hmm. and create. I think there's a lot of people that are interested in contributing in similar ways. Or at the bare minimum, being able to just frolic in the splendor of everything that everyone else has created and just, you know, have a diversion, a distraction, something that gives them joy.
Great. We only have a couple minutes left, and we've got a little sneak peek that Paul's going to introduce. But before that, because that sneak peek's a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, I just want to talk to the kind of work that's going on, which is that we view the Axie universe as this expansive, multi-generational, lots and lots of time passing by story world of the origin of Lunasia, of the origin of Axies, and generations of Axies that have been through different stories and are really the fulfillment of a very evocative cosmology. And we see all of that as an amazing platform. Think of it in the context of Star Wars, of lots of different stories that can be told in different formats, not just games, but comic books, movies, web series. Really, anything can be a canvas to fill in those blanks and to tell Axie stories along with the community. So we are evolving and growing towards something that will be much, much bigger than just games. And Paul, if you want to kind of introduce it, we've got some visuals that speak to some of the work that's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, so as I was alluding to before, with Origin, at least with the games as you've seen them, you've basically been viewing the world through a pinhole. And I think where we're looking to head is to maybe describe, like, how did Lunasia form? What are the foundations? And so there are these storyboards that are being developed, and the Vietnamese team wanted to share these with you all, but to give you a sense of, you know, a different kind of visual style, a more storytelling style. Just absolutely beautiful art.
As we're starting to expand and redefine what an Axie story can be.
and really create a much larger visual canvas that starts to give people a sense of the scale of this world. And these storyboards are going to be early versions into a video that will be shared sooner versus later.
So we have been counted down by the monitor.
Yes, we have.
It's been awesome being here, talking about lore, and we're all just humbled and grateful to be here for the ride as this universe expands and grows from these initial seeds that the community has nurtured so beautifully into the enormous cross-channel, really entertainment franchise that I believe it's going to become.
And thanks to everyone for giving us the opportunity to build out this world and to collaborate with you all, and we look forward to engaging you more and more in that process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.